Sheila, thank you very much for coming in today to talk about authentic listening. It's really good of you to come in to talk about this. You're very well known for your belief in the need to have authentic listening in the classroom. My first question, what's your interest in authentic listening? Where did this come from?
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me, Ben. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. You asked where my interest came from. I think it was when I was 14. I went on a school trip to France, and I'd been quite good at French at school with the grammar and vocabulary. And then we went to France, and I was so excited. I was going to meet real French people, use this language that I'd learnt. And I got there, got friendly with a girl, and went back to see her family. And I very quickly realised that I didn't understand anything anybody was saying. And even then, at 14, I thought, well, this is a little bit odd. I'm learning this language, but it's very different from the spoken language I'm encountering. A couple of years later, I was learning German. I went on a school trip to Germany. Exactly the same thing happened. I couldn't understand what people were saying. And then another 6 years later, I'd been studying Swedish at a university in Germany. Went to live in Sweden. I got a teaching job there. All excited, going to use this language. And even then, the language that I was encountering from a listening perspective was so different from the grammatical language that I'd learnt in the classroom. And it was just devastating. I'd spent so long learning these languages, but I didn't feel I was getting anywhere. And the main reason for learning a language is communicating.
Yeah.
So I felt quite disappointed. And then when, all those years later, I became an English teacher, teaching people from other countries, then I was determined that they would be exposed to authentic listening.
A really interesting experience. I think a lot of teachers have that experience as well. How did that change your teaching as a result of that?
When I came back from Sweden, I'd done 2 years out there, I eventually got a job at a school where I was teaching. When I came back from Sweden, having spent 2 years there teaching English as a foreign language, I went back to teaching French and German, but I didn't enjoy it so much. So then I became a director of studies at a language school in central London. And as the director of studies, then I was able to have quite a lot of control over the syllabus and so on. So one of the first things we did was buy a language lab, which was great. But there were no authentic listening materials on the market. So what I started doing was recording programs, recording interviews with people, turning those into teaching materials for authentic listening. And what I noticed with our students was when they were doing the kind of official exams, like First Certificate or CAE, they were not at all worried. I mean, students normally find listening incredibly difficult, but because they were being exposed to authentic listening, they just found these official exams very, very easy. And that's something I really like about teaching authentic listening, because you don't need a lot of effort, you don't need a lot of practice to find that students can make a huge amount of progress in a very, very short time. And for the students, yes, they're just like me learning French and German. They might be very good in the classroom dealing with these printed course book materials, but the satisfaction they can get from actually understanding a real live native speaker of that language is beyond belief. It's wonderful. So I find that very satisfying as a teacher.
Yeah, you gave your own experience in France. I remember when I was learning French and I went on a school trip, and the motivation when I was understood, it was tremendous. I really wanted to learn French as opposed to when I was actually in a classroom in deepest Scotland, learning French, and it was just so far removed, from just the cassettes that we were listening to. So I really empathise with that experience.
Oh, good, yeah. But that kind of speaking a language is absolutely wonderful. I was in Cornwall a few weeks ago. We were at Land's End watching the sunset, and behind me there were two elderly German ladies, and I heard one of them say, in German, what time will the sun set? And her friend said 9:17, and I was able to just turn around and say in German, I think you're still on German time. We're a little bit more relaxed over here. It was just great. We had a long conversation. Or a few weeks ago, I was in Hyde Park and looking at the map, and there were some Swedish ladies. And one of them said, "I know where we are. We're here." And she was absolutely on the wrong side of the map. And I was able to say in Swedish, "Actually, you're not. You're here." That saved you a few kilometres walking.
Yeah, I bet getting lost.
But that ability to speak a language, especially to be able to communicate, not with writing and reading, but with spoken language, is one of the joys of life, I think.
So, why do you feel we need to improve the way we teach listening?
I think there's confusion amongst language teachers and exam boards and materials writers. They don't see that there's two very distinct things. And the first one is learning the L1 through listening, and the second one is learning to listen in the L1. They really are very, very distinct. Learning the L1 through listening is your typical thing where you have course book, starts off with a dialogue. Mm-hmm. That's got the target grammatical structures and lexis. Brilliant. And that's what we call modelling the language. So from that, the students are exposed to the language and they are gradually, through the course of the unit, expected to produce the language. But that's incredibly different from listening to native speakers, as we were saying before, speaking the language. They're two distinct things. And just because you're doing lots of modelling work with the students and you're going through the course book, that doesn't mean that they're going to get any better at listening. And the reason for that is because they're modelling the language. You have actors speaking very clearly in a recording studio, no background noise, artificially slow speed of delivery, what Richard Caldwell calls the careful speech model. So that clearly enunciated spoken language is a million miles away from the authentic spoken language the students encounter outside the classroom. And students can be ever so good in the language classroom, learning English, learning all the rules, doing really well on grammar tests, but then they come out and they can't understand a word anybody says, and that's what's so depressing for the students. So there is that confusion, and until teachers and coursebook writers and exam boards make that distinction between, on the one hand, learning the language through listening, on the other hand, learning to listen to the authentic spoken language, we're not going to get any further forward.
So I guess the importance then is of having, as you say, course books or resources or exams which really have some kind of integration of the speaking and listening. It's not just a one-way side of things, something a bit more integrated perhaps.
There's another misguided belief that students don't have to listen to every word to be able to comprehend. And this has kind of gone into classroom language. It drives me mad. It's saying to the students, don't worry, you don't need to understand every word, just listen out for the main stressed words and it'll all be fine. And that's just a horrible thing to say to the students, because when that kind of activity of just listening out for the stressed words, there can be a huge amount of miscomprehension going on. And it's also giving students the false view that they don't need to listen to understand every single word. And what we're doing there is we're missing out the kind of building blocks of listening, which is just a travesty, I find. So really, I think we should spend a lot of time with students working on this, what we call decoding, recognising words in what Richard Caldwell calls the stream of speech, being able to segment that. But those two misapprehensions, that students, if they have more words then they'll learn, their listening will be much better. No. And the other one about, no, you don't need to listen to every word. You and I, Ben, we don't need to listen to every word when we're, say, in a pub listening to a conversation, but we're native speakers. We've had so much exposure to spoken English. Our students haven't, and they need to be taught in the early stages, yes, you do need to listen and recognise words.
So is there anything else which you think teachers might be misguided about in terms of what they're doing in the classroom?
Yes, there is, and I think this is, teachers are kind, they want their students to be happy, but they forget that learning a language is a difficult thing. It takes hours and hours and hours and a lot of really hard work. But the teachers kind of want to be kind to their students, they want to make it easier for their students, they don't want to expose their students to anything that's a bit scary, a bit challenging. They're too protective, I find, and this was something that went on for years and years. I was teaching at conferences, giving talks at conferences for refugees, teachers of refugees and asylum seekers. Lovely, absolutely lovely people. And they were going, you can't use authentic materials with low-level learners. And this was happening year after year. And I was going, you can, and they'd go, no, you can't, and we'd have another spat, and it went on and on and on. And when I did start writing the books, I was absolutely determined to prove you could use authentic materials with low-level learners. So that's why I started with an elementary level. And just by choosing the correct speakers, teachers, for example, speak a lot slower than somebody working in a shop, you can then, it's authentic. The students are pleased, they're happy, they're listening to a real person. But the amount of material you can get from that in terms of phonology, grammatical structures and lexis is just wonderful, and it's motivating.
I think, yes, I agree entirely. I think the teachers need to be, I think, a lot better at mining that authentic material for something just more than the phonological decoding of it, but as you say, for the lexis, the grammar and everything else that's in there as well.
The danger is it's incredibly rich, which is why I would say you only need short extracts. But it's wonderful and it's so satisfying as a teacher, and I wish more of them were doing it. But that we seem to have just fallen into the listening comprehension trap, and that's a little bit sad. So you get teachers even now, they'll just record something, write a load of questions, you've got right, wrong answers, and the kind of assumption is, students are going to become better at listening doing that, and it's just not true. You can have exposed students to listening comprehension after listening comprehension, and the same proportion of students will get the answers right, the same will get them wrong. It's just done as a kind of test, and it's not done in a way of training students to listen more effectively. It's just testing what the listening ability is like at that point in time, and they don't improve by exposure to that kind of listening practice.
It needs to be something more scaffolded, breaking down, as you say, or decoding actually that stream of speech.
Yes, decoding, because most of the misunderstandings or miscommunication happen due to low-level decoding errors rather than kind of meaning-building errors.
So, apart from your own experiences, incredibly rich as they are, has anyone else really influenced your views on listening and how we should teach listening?
There are two men who I'm pleased to say have become very good friends. One, Dr. John Field, who's kind of
incredible,
guru about listening. Absolutely brilliant. He was the one who coined the expression "the product of listening" rather than the process of listening. And just now I was talking about the listening comprehension approach. John's very good on that. That listening comprehension is a product. The answers to questions are the product, and not enough time is spent on the process of listening, which is, as we were saying, decoding. The other one is Richard Caldwell, and he's written a wonderful book called Phonology for Listening, where he goes through what the decoding problems are for students in a very straightforward way. But those two, I think, have been the biggest influence on me when it comes to designing authentic listening materials, which I've done for my books.
All right, so three, including yourself, three authors. It'd be good to, I suppose, for teachers, both pre-service and in-service, really to get to know more about listening, taking it beyond this somewhat problematic listening comprehension approach.
Absolutely, yes. I think we kind of see ourselves as a triumvirate.
Right, a mighty triumvirate, I imagine. All right, Sheila, thank you very much.
That's a pleasure. Thank you.